Hi, I'm Ela Busala, and today I will be explaining price elasticity of supply, which is a very important concept for microeconomics. So now let's start with what price elasticity of supply is. As you can see from this orange box right here, price elasticity of supply is a measure of the responsiveness of the quantity of a good supplied to changes in its price. So it basically measures the degree of responsiveness of quantity supplied to a change in price. It's not simply about whether supply increases when price increases, which is the law of supply. Instead, the PES, which is the abbreviation of price elasticity of supply, measures how much does quantity supplied change in relative to the price change. So this idea of relative responsiveness or flexibility is extremely important in PES. So imagine a price increased by 10%. If it increased by 10%, there are three possibilities. Some producers could react in a weak way, so the quantity they supplied could only increase by 2%. This is a weak reaction because they didn't really change the quantity of supplied in accordance with the price change. So we would call this inelastic because they didn't respond that much, they didn't react that much. However, the second possibility could be that the quantity increased by 10% for some producers. So this is very proportional to the price change. So we would say that the reaction is proportional and it's unit elastic because they still reacted. They are still flexible, like they changed the quantity of supplied according to the price increase by 10%. And the last possibility could be that the quantities increased by 25 or even maybe 50%. That's right, 25. So this means that it's a strong reaction because even though the price increased only by 10%, the quantity increased by 25%, which is much larger, which shows that there was a much stronger reaction. So this means that the reactions are elastic. So what I would conclude from this, that elasticity is about sensitivity. It asks whether the producers are flexible, so if the prices increase, whether they can increase the amount they produce, whether they can quickly adjust output, or are they constrained and they don't react, or if they don't react that much. So why do producers react to price changes? So when price rises, when this price rises by 10%, firms expect a higher profit because they want to earn more revenue, and if the prices rise, they expect a higher profit. And higher profit creates incentive to produce more, so firms try to expand output. However, the firms that can expand their output are elastic because if the prices increase, they want to expect higher profits, so they increase the quantity that they want. They increase the quantity they supply and increase their revenue. However, not all firms can expand easily because some face constraints like, let's say, limited factory size, limited raw materials, skilled labor shortages, or even long production processes could be a constraint for them. So elasticity reflects how constrained producers are and how flexible they are in their reactions to change in prices. So now I want to look at these very important graphs about price elasticity of supply. So first, imagine a standard supply graph, which is, as you can see, like this: supply curve, price, and quantity. So its vertical axis, this one right here, is price, and its horizontal axis, this one right here, is quantity, and the supply curve is sloping upward. And this is the demand curve in opposing to the supply curve. So now suppose that the price increases from P1 to P2, which moves upward along the supply curve. So the key question here is that how large is the horizontal movement? So how large is this change in quantity from Q1 to Q2? So this horizontal movement determines elasticity. So let's look at these graphs right now. The first graph I will look at is the price elastic supply. So in price elastic supply, the PES, the abbreviation of price elasticity of the supply, is larger than 1. Because if the producers are elastic, they are more responsive. So if the prices change more, they change the quantity supplied even more. So looking at the graph, you can see that the quantity increases a lot. So the quantity increased by 15%. However, the prices only increased by 10%. So the quantity increased is much larger than the price increase. So this means that the horizontal movement, which is this movement right here, is larger. The vertical movement, which is the price change, because the vertical axis is the price, is small relative to the quantity change, as you can also see from these this little triangle right here. So visually, the curve looks a little more horizontal, and it stretches widely across the quantity axis because the quantity supplied in price elastic supply graph is larger than the price change. So to sum up, a small vertical movement, which is this one right here, upward causes a very large horizontal movement to the right, which is this movement to the right. So this shows that the producers are high responsive. So the responsiveness is high. So this is the elastic supply, price elasticity of supply graph. Now let's look at the inelastic supply graph. So again, there is a supply curve right here, supply line, and the horizontal axis is quantity, vertical axis is price. However, this time the quantity increases only slightly. As you can see from these spaces right here as well, the quantity only increases by 5%. So the horizontal movement is small, but the vertical movement is large relative to the quantity change. As you can see here as well, the price change is 10%. However, the quantity change is 5%, so the vertical movement is larger than the horizontal movement. So this means that visually the curve looks a little more vertical than the elastic supply curve, and the quantity barely changes even when prices rise significantly. So to sum up, even though prices rise a lot by 10% here, quantity barely moves by 5%. So this means that the producers are not very responsive. So they aren't flexible, they aren't elastic, they're inelastic. So this will sum up the inelastic supply curve. And also don't forget that the PES is smaller than 1 in the inelastic supply curve. However, it's larger than 1 in the elastic supply curve. So now let's look at the special cases of the graphs of elasticity of supply. So look at this perfectly inelastic supply curve, which is a vertical line, as you can see. So the quantity is fixed. It's always fixed at Q1 and it doesn't change. However, the prices can rise or fall however they want. So the price could be at P1, it could be at P2, it could be at P3. So they can change, the producers can, the prices can change in every way. However, the quantity never changes. It's always the same. So there's zero horizontal movement. So this means that there's no responsiveness at all because even though the prices change, the quantity supplied stays always the same. So it's perfectly inelastic. So it's perfectly not flexible and flexible. So now let's look at the perfectly elastic supply graph. So this is the perfectly horizontal graph. This means that there is one price at which producers are willing to supply, which is P1. And if the price stays at that level, if the price stays at P1, the firms supply at any amount. So they can supply at Q1, at Q2, even at Q3. So even though the quantity supply changes, the price is always the same. So this is a perfectly elastic supply graph. The PES goes to infinity. So I want to discuss why steepness reflects elasticity. So elasticity is fundamentally about the relative horizontal movement compared to the vertical movement, because the horizontal movement is the percent change in quantity. However, the vertical movement is the percent change in the price change. So think of it this way. The elastic supply curve is flatter. So this one was the elastic one. This is the inelastic one. Compared to this S2 graph. So elastic supply is flatter and the quantity is very sensitive. So even a very small change in price, as you can see right here, change the quantity in a much higher matter. Let's draw it from here. It changed the quantity like this, a very small price change. However, look at the inelastic one. The price changed in a much larger way. However, the quantity changed in a smaller way compared to, in the same way compared to the other one. So if this is P2, this is P1, the price, let's say P1 is 5 and P2 is 10 and this one is 5. So in the let's look at second graph. So let's say that here is 3 as well. P3 is 3. So if the price is changed by 3 in S3, the quantity changes by 5. However, in S1, if the price changes by 10, the quantity changes again by 5. So this means that S1 is much more inelastic and S3 is more elastic than S1. So more flatter means more elastic and more steeper means more inelastic. So now I want to look at the calculations for PES. So the formula of the price elasticity of supply is that PES equals to the change in quantity supplied, the percent change in quantity supplied divided by the percent change in price. So this formula is extremely important because we do not use absolute changes, we use percentage changes. So these percentages are very important here. And if you ask why, because elasticity measures relative responsiveness, not simple differences. So now let's compare two examples. First example could be that the prices increased from $10 to $12, let's say, and that's a $2 increase. And let's say example A for this, and example B, price increase from $100 to $102. Again, there is a $2 increase. So the absolute change is the same. It's $2 for both of them. But economically, they're different because in example A, $2 is a 20% increase because it's 2 divided by 10 times 100. However, in example B, $2 is only 2% because it's 2 divided by 100 times 100, which is 2% in this one, and it's 20% change in this one. So even though the prices changed in amount, in absolute amounts, in the same way, in percent, A changed much larger than B. So the producers will react very differently in those two cases. This is why elasticity must be measured in percentages. So this is why the percentage highlight I did was very important because it also allows fair comparison regardless of the starting price. So as you can also see from here, in this one I started the price from 100 and in this one 10, even though in absolute amount they both changed in $2. The percentage change in example A was much larger than the percentage change in B. So this means that the reactivity or like the reactiveness or the flexibility in A was much larger. So this formula compares how much quantity changes relative to how much price changes. To sum up, if quantity changes more than price, it's elastic. If quantity changes less than price, it's inelastic. And if they change proportionally, it's unit elastic. Which is also from here you can see the one what I drew with the color pink, it's unit elastic because the price change and the quantity change is proportional. So elasticity is essentially about a ratio of responsiveness. And this was all for today about price elasticity of supply. See you next time.